Hi everyone. In this video we're going to be writing sinusoidal equations from graphs. We'll review the transformations and then we will write equations in sine and cosine. So let's get started. Alright, let's review the transformations of sine and cosine curves. Both of these equations that I have here are the same thing. But you'll notice that D is written first here. This is like how it's written in your book. But most of the time when you see transformations, you see this D out towards the back. Okay, so remember that the A refers to the amplitude, and that is a vertical stretch or shrink. That's vertical. Okay, the B, as you recall, helps you find the period. And remember that for sine and cosine, the period is 2 pi. So the period is 2 pi over whatever that letter B is. Now, if you'll notice, I have this caution at the bottom down here. It says B must be factored out first. The factoring affects C. So this is really important because a lot of times they will write the equation unfactored. This will be unfactored, and so you will need to factor that out to find out. It won't affect B, it affects C. And C is, of course, a translation. And this will move the graph right if it's negative and left if it's positive. And then D, whether it's written in the front or in the back, is also a translation. And up if it's positive, and down if it's negative. Okay? Okay, so we're going to write an equation from this graph. And if you'll remember, the sine and the cosine graphs are just translations of each other. So when you write an equation from a graph, you actually have a choice. You can write it as a cosine graph or as a sine graph. Basically, what I would choose if you have a choice is look here at 0, 0. And if the graph crosses the origin, then I would use sine, because then the translation is, and it's not there, it's not translated. If you choose cosine, then you'll have to translate it, because remember that cosine crosses the y-axis at the amplitude. Okay, so we have an equation. Let's use sine. And I'm going to write y equals a sine b x, and I'll just put minus c, and then plus d. And we'll write the equation, we'll figure out what a, b, c, and d are, okay, from the graph. All right, so the first thing we want to look at then is the amplitude of the graph. And so it goes from 2 to negative 2, that's 4. So a is 4 divided by 2, so a is just 2. Okay, b is the period, or helps us find the period, right? So the period is 2 pi over b, and that's going to equal one entire period is 4 pi over 3. So we could do, we have 4 pi b equals 6 pi. b is going to be 6 over 4, which is 3 halves. So we have b is equal to 3 halves. That's what my b is. Okay, then for sine, I look at C and I see, no, it's not moved. It's still the complete period. So C is going to be 0. And it's not moved up or down, so D is going to be 0. So if I go ahead and write my equation, I would have y equals 2 sine 3 halves x. And that's the equation. Okay, I want to go ahead and write another equation. So I'm taking a look here, and I'm seeing that the amplitude this time, I make sure that it goes all the way, both ways. So that's 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I know that A is 4. That's my amplitude. My period, 2 pi over B, is equal to 4 pi over 3 again. So remember that was 4 pi B. So this is 6 pi over 4 pi, which is 3 halves. All right. Now, on this time, it says write it using sine, okay? But it starts up here, so it does have a translation. It does have a translation. So if I'm using sine, sine would normally be here. So that means that the graph has been moved to the left. How much? Well, it looks like pi over 3. All right, so that means that C is going to be pi over 3. And so when I go to write my equation, I'm going to have y equals A, which is 4, sine, my period is, or B is 3/2, and because I'm going to translate it, I'm going to put the rest in parentheses. So this will be x, and I'm going left, so plus pi over 3. So that's writing the sine, writing that as sine. If I were writing that as cosine, that would be 4 cosine 3/2 x, and not moved. Okay, so you're moving it 1/4 of a period to the left. Okay, here's one more. We're going to write the equation from the graph. And first of all, I want to determine if I want to do sine or cosine. Okay, and so I'm going to look at the origin since I have a choice, and since it crosses at the origin, I'm going to pick sine. All right, the second thing I want to determine is the amplitude. And so I check, and it goes up to 2 and down to 2, so my amplitude is going to be 2. The next thing I want to check is my period. How far does it take to make an entire graph? So I'm going to start here at 0, goes up, back to 0, down, back to 0. This is one period right here. And so it finishes an entire period in pi. So that means that 2 pi over b is going to equal pi. Right? So that means that b is going to equal 2. All right. Does it go up or down? So any phase shift. So what is c going to equal? Well, it doesn't move right or left, so this is 0, and it doesn't move up or down, so that's 0. And so I'm going to write my sine graph, y equals 2 sine, and then my b is also 2 theta. So we're going to have a lot more practice in class working with these. But you're going to need to understand all the parts. And if you understand all the parts, you can always work it backwards. So be sure you've taken very good notes. I'm going to be looking at your notes. There is value to watching the video. So if you have not watched the video, you might want to write this word down at the very I can't even spell it, sinusoidal in your notebook. I'm going to be looking for that. And if somebody just copies your notes, don't tell them about it. All right, I will see you in class.